The message came in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet hours when nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. A ping, a name I recognized from my husband's office, and then an image that made the room around me feel suddenly too bright, too still. It took a second for my brain to catch up, to decide whether I'd really seen what I thought I had. Because whatever it was, it definitely wasn't about work. Let's say his name was Daniel, my husband. Charming, responsible, the kind of man people naturally trusted. The kind who knew how to smile in photos without overdoing it, who remembered birthdays and always texted me when he was heading home soon. We'd been married 5 years, long enough to grow comfortable, to know each other's rhythms, or at least I thought I did. And Melissa, she wasn't a stranger. She'd been at our wedding, though only as someone's +1 from the office. I remembered her laughing too loudly, complimenting my dress twice, and saying, "You're so lucky Daniel's everyone's favorite." Back then, I'd smiled, thinking it was just flattery. Now that memory had a different weight to it, one that settled somewhere deep in my stomach. I kept staring at the photo, trying to decode its intent. It wasn't overtly inappropriate, but it wasn't professional either. It had that studied casualness, the kind of image people send when they're pretending they didn't mean to say more than they did. The lighting, the angle, the expression, it all looked deliberate, a secret disguised as an accident. At first, I wanted to believe it was innocent. I even rehearsed what I'd write back. "Hey, just letting you know, I think this wasn't meant for me," with a polite little laugh emoji to keep things light. But my hand wouldn't move, because something about the photo, the detail, the way she looked into the camera, felt too intimate for coincidence, and, worse, too familiar. I zoomed in on the background, searching for clues like a detective in my own living room, the faint outline of a mirror, the edge of a desk, a chair behind her. And then, barely visible, a reflection. Not clear, but enough to make my pulse jump. A man's arm, a watch glinting against the glass. The watch. The one I'd picked out for Daniel last Christmas. Silver, with a small scratch on the clasp that only I'd ever noticed. For a full minute, I couldn't move. The photo felt radioactive in my hand. I wanted to throw my phone, to erase it, to pretend I hadn't seen what I'd just seen. But my mind kept circling the same thought. If this is what it looks like, then how long has it been like this? The room around me blurred. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the world still spinning as if nothing had changed. But everything had. My hands were trembling so hard, I had to set the phone down. I walked to the window, staring out at the street, watching people pass by, a jogger, a mother pushing a stroller, a couple laughing as they crossed the road. Everyone looked so normal. It was almost offensive. Part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe she was showing him something and accidentally sent it to me instead. But the logic in my head couldn't fight the feeling in my chest. I knew that photo wasn't a mistake. Not in the way she wanted me to think it was. I opened our last conversation. His messages were there, ordinary, harmless. "Running late today. Don't wait for me, I'll grab dinner on the way." The kind of words that once sounded thoughtful, now echoing with double meaning. And just like that, the world I'd built around trust began to tilt. I didn't know what I'd say to him yet, or if I'd say anything at all. But I did know this. The woman who'd received that message wasn't the same one who'd woken up that morning. I didn't delete the photo. I couldn't. It just sat there on my screen, radiating quiet chaos. Like an open wound I kept looking at because I couldn't believe it existed. Every time I tried to go back to what I was doing, answering emails, folding laundry, pretending it was a normal afternoon, my eyes drifted back to it. The colors, the framing, the unspoken message behind it. My mind refused to let it go. At first, I tried to rationalize. There had to be another explanation. There always is, right? Maybe she was sending him something funny, a joke, a tease, taken out of context. Maybe there was a whole conversation before that I wasn't seeing. I even considered texting her, keeping my tone light, pretending I wasn't shaking as I typed. "Hey, Melissa, I think you sent something by mistake." But before I could hit send, I saw the little gray status under her message. Read. She'd seen it. She hadn't unsent it. She hadn't followed up. That told me more than any reply ever could. For the rest of the day, I moved through the house like a ghost. The sunlight felt artificial, like the world outside was playing along with the illusion of normalcy, while mine quietly cracked open. I made coffee I didn't drink, scrolled through my phone pretending to read news headlines. The photo stayed in the back of my mind like static, humming just below consciousness. By the time Daniel got home, it was dark. I heard his car in the driveway, the familiar sound of keys jangling, the door clicking open. My body reacted before my brain did. Heart hammering, breath shallow, that instinctive flinch of someone who suddenly doesn't know who they're about to see. He walked in smiling, that practiced kind of tired smile people wear after long days at work. "Hey, babe," he said, dropping his bag, loosening his tie. "How was your day?" I looked at him, at the man I'd trusted more than anyone, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. His face was the same, his voice warm and easy, but all I could see was that reflection in the photo, his arm, his watch, the ghost of a truth he hadn't told me yet. "Fine," I said, and even I didn't believe how steady my voice sounded. He kept talking about traffic, about the new intern, about something that had happened in a meeting. I nodded, smiled where I was supposed to, the way you do when you're observing someone rather than engaging with them. Every sentence he spoke sounded rehearsed, too smooth. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. It hovered between us, invisible but enormous. At dinner, he reached for his phone a few times, glancing at the screen, quick little flicks of his eyes like reflexes. I noticed every one of them. When his phone buzzed again, he turned it face down, a normal, harmless motion. Except tonight, it wasn't harmless at all. It was confirmation. He didn't notice how quiet I'd become, maybe because he didn't want to. He finished eating, kissed my temple as he cleared the dishes, and went upstairs to shower. The sound of running water filled the house, and I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark window. The outline of a woman who suddenly didn't know which parts of her life were still real. I opened my phone again. The message was still there. I scrolled up through my chat with Melissa, looking for any clue that could make it make sense. Birthday wishes, a thank you for a Christmas card, a photo of cupcakes I'd once baked for their office. Nothing more. No hidden tone, no boundary ever crossed, until now. It was almost insulting how abrupt it was. That's what made it feel intentional. I started imagining her face, the way she smiled at office parties, the way she'd once called him so funny, that casual compliment women give when they're testing waters. Suddenly, all the memories I'd brushed off began rearranging themselves into something that made sense, in the worst way possible. I felt something shift inside me, not rage yet, not grief either, but a cold, lucid kind of awareness. The kind you feel when the puzzle finally fits, even though you wish it didn't. When Daniel came back downstairs, hair damp, phone in hand, I watched him move through the room as if nothing had changed. And maybe for him, nothing had. Maybe this had been normal for a while. Maybe I was just the last one to catch up. He caught my gaze and smiled, that soft, effortless smile that had once made me feel lucky. Now it just felt like performance. I forced a smile back. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed time. Time to breathe, to think, to decide how to play a game I hadn't realized I was already in. That night, I lay in bed beside him, eyes open, listening to the even rhythm of his breathing. My phone sat on the nightstand next to his, the screen's dark, twin black mirrors. I reached for mine once, opened the photo again, and stared at it under the dim light until the image blurred. I wasn't ready to confront him yet, but something in me had already changed. I was done being the woman who explained away what she saw. This time I would let the truth reveal itself, quietly, completely on its own terms. Before that message, before everything shifted, I would have told anyone we had a good marriage. Not perfect, but solid in the ways that mattered. Daniel and I met 7 years ago at a friend's engagement party. He was the kind of person who filled silence easily, confident without being loud, funny without trying. I remember how he made everyone laugh that night, then found me later in the kitchen refilling my drink and said, "You've been avoiding me all evening." I hadn't been. But the way he said it, like it was already a shared secret, made something in me lean toward him. From the start, Daniel had a steadiness that felt safe. He wasn't the grand gesture type. He was practical, thoughtful in small ways that made big impressions. The first time he came to my apartment, he fixed a squeaky cabinet door without me asking. When I told him I didn't like flowers because they die too fast, he brought a potted plant instead. He remembered my favorite brand of tea, how I take my coffee, the song I played when I couldn't sleep. Those were the details that made me fall for him, the quiet consistency of someone who noticed. Our life together grew in predictable, comfortable lines. We got married in a small ceremony on the coast, surrounded by family and friends. He cried during the vows, just a little, and I remember thinking, this is what it means to feel chosen. We bought a modest house 2 years later, painted the walls ourselves, argued about curtains, and laughed until we were too tired to care. There were Sunday mornings with pancakes and messy hair, lazy evenings with movies and takeout, spontaneous road trips that always ended with him getting lost and refusing to admit it. For a while, it really did feel like forever was something we could build with steady hands. His job was demanding, long hours, constant emails, urgent meetings that stretched late into the night. But he loved what he did, and I never resented it. I used to joke that his phone was his second wife. He'd laugh, slip it into his pocket, and kiss me on the forehead like that was proof I had nothing to worry about. And I believed him, because trust, when it's comfortable, doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like gravity. You don't question what holds you up until it's gone. Melissa came into the picture about 2 years ago, one of the newer hires. I didn't think much of it when he first mentioned her. "She's young, ambitious, reminds me of me at that age," he said. I smiled, proud of him for mentoring someone. That's the thing about hindsight. It turns every innocent memory into a red flag you somehow missed. She started popping up more often in stories from work. Melissa landed a client today. Melissa stayed late to help with the presentation. Melissa's hilarious, you'd like her. Each mention came wrapped in casual praise, the kind that doesn't raise alarms until you realize how often her name replaces yours in their daily rhythm. There were small moments when my intuition stirred, but I smothered it quickly, like the night he came home later than usual, smelling faintly of wine and citrus. He said they'd been out celebrating a big contract. I remember asking who they were, and he listed off 3 names too quickly. Hers last. I didn't press. He'd never given me a reason not to trust him. That was the thought I kept repeating, like a prayer meant to silence doubt. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared exhaustion after long weeks. On weekends, we'd go to the same diner we'd loved since dating. He'd order the same breakfast every time, eggs, toast, black coffee, and tease me for taking forever to decide what I wanted. Sometimes, between the noise of clinking dishes and chatter, I'd look at him and think how lucky I was that love could look so steady. I mistook comfort for certainty and routine for loyalty. Now, when I think about those mornings, I realize I was memorizing details that would later hurt to remember. The way he held his coffee with both hands when he was tired. The way his eyes softened when he talked about our future. The trips we'd take. The house renovations we'd eventually get around to. I used to think those moments were proof of our strength. Now I see they were the quiet lull before something cracked beneath us. Because looking back, the truth wasn't hiding. It was woven into the everyday in the late nights, the vague explanations, the conversations that ended too easily. I just didn't know yet that love can't protect you from betrayal. It only makes the fall harder when it comes. If I had to pinpoint when things started feeling off, I couldn't name a single day. It was more like a slow fade, the way color drains from a photograph until you only notice it's gone when you compare it to what it used to be. At first, it was subtle. His voice over the phone sounded a little distracted. His goodnight texts came later, and his laughter, the one that used to reach his eyes, started landing a little flat. He blamed it on work. There was always some new project, some demanding client, some crisis that needed him. "It's just a rough quarter," he'd say, loosening his tie as if exhaustion were proof of loyalty. I wanted to believe him. And maybe that's what love is. Sometimes a series of tiny concessions you make against your better judgment. I told myself it was normal, that marriages have quiet seasons. But somewhere in that quiet, I started losing the sound of us. I remember the first time he came home late without warning. It was early spring, and the rain had started before sunset. I'd cooked his favorite dinner, pasta with too much garlic, and waited until the sauce went cold. When he finally walked in, 2 hours later, he smiled and said, "You didn't have to wait." The words were soft, but they landed like a dismissal. That night, he fell asleep before I could ask anything, and I lay beside him, wide awake, listening to the rhythm of a stranger's breathing. After that, the excuses multiplied. Meetings ran longer, traffic was worse, deadlines doubled overnight. Sometimes he'd text, "Don't wait up," and I'd catch myself staring at those words, wondering if they were kindness or warning. He'd always been good with words, the kind that sounded true even when they weren't. Melissa's name started coming up more often, casually slipped into stories about his day. "Melissa handled that client better than anyone," he'd say. Or, "Melissa saved us in that meeting. She's sharp." I'd smile, nod, and ask polite questions. I didn't want to sound jealous. I told myself I was being mature, secure, the kind of wife who didn't interrogate every woman who happened to exist near her husband. But each mention of her name left a small, sharp echo in my chest that I couldn't quiet. Then came the phone. The same device that once buzzed with our texts and plans started living face down on the counter. He took it to the bathroom, to the garage, even out to the trash cans, all those small, meaningless errands that suddenly needed company. I noticed, but said nothing. My silence became its own kind of habit, something I carried like an apology. We still had our good days, the ones that trick you into thinking everything's fine. We'd cook breakfast together on Sundays, watch old sitcoms, argue over nothing. But those moments started to feel like replicas, perfect on the surface, hollow underneath. I could feel him pulling away inch by inch, even while sitting right beside me. His body was there, but his focus was somewhere else, somewhere that didn't include me. One night, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found him sitting on the couch in the dark, screen light flickering across his face. He jumped when he saw me, clicked his phone off too quickly. "Couldn't sleep," he said, forcing a laugh. I wanted to ask who he'd been talking to, but the words stuck in my throat. The truth was right there, glowing between us, but I still wasn't ready to touch it. Instead, I just nodded, turned off the kitchen light, and went back upstairs. That was the night I realized silence can sound a lot like denial. Little by little, the house started feeling heavier. The laughter we used to share turned into small talk. The warmth between us became politeness. And still, I kept choosing hope, because admitting what I already knew felt like betrayal, not of him, but of the story I'd spent years believing. Looking back, I think he was already gone long before the photo ever reached my phone. Maybe that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't start with the lie itself, but with the quiet distance that teaches you how to miss someone who's still standing in front of you. The night after Melissa's mistake, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the image in fragments, like a film stuck on loop. Her reflection, that watch, his name at the top of our text thread. I kept asking myself if I was being paranoid, if I'd somehow built an entire narrative from one careless photo. But every time I tried to rationalize, something inside me whispered, "You already know." By morning, I decided not to mention it. Not yet. I wanted to see how he'd behave, if he'd slip up on his own. The version of me who used to believe in open communication was gone. This new one had learned that silence could be its own kind of power. When Daniel came down for breakfast, he was all ease and routine. "You're up early," he said, kissing my cheek. His phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen, just long enough to catch a glimpse of a name before it went dark. Melissa. The universe wasn't subtle anymore. It was screaming. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, my tone light, pretending the question didn't weigh 1,000 pounds. He smiled, slicing toast as if we were talking about weather. "Just the usual chaos. You know how it is." I studied his face, calm, confident, the same one I'd fallen in love with. It's unsettling how betrayal can wear such a familiar expression. The day passed in a blur. I tried to distract myself, answering emails, cleaning the house, anything to quiet the noise in my head. But every vibration from my phone made my stomach twist. Every message I didn't send burned in my chest. That afternoon, curiosity became compulsion. I opened Melissa's profile on social media, something I'd never done before. Her page was polished, curated, full of office selfies and team appreciation posts. In one of them, Daniel stood behind her, smiling, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. It wasn't an inappropriate photo, at least not to anyone else, but I saw the detail that ruined me. The same watch again, the same rolled-up sleeves, the same look he used to give me when he thought no one was watching. The comments beneath were harmless, coworkers joking, friends hyping her up, except one from Daniel, best teammate I could ask for. I stared at the words until they blurred. My heart didn't race this time. It just sank. That night, I couldn't pretend anymore. I wanted to ask him, to hold up the phone and demand the truth, but I also knew how well he lied when cornered. Too calm, too logical. He'd say she meant nothing, that I was imagining things, that I'd misunderstood, and maybe, for a few more days, I'd believe him again. I couldn't give him that power. Not this time. So I decided to wait, to watch, to collect what I needed, not to accuse, but to know. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. Over the next week, I started noticing everything. How his phone always followed him. How his late meetings multiplied. How he suddenly wore cologne on weekdays and took longer showers. The man who used to share everything. Random thoughts, office gossip, even which coworker annoyed him, had gone quiet. His world had shifted, and I was no longer inside it. On Thursday, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. A restaurant I didn't recognize. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of wine, a date that matched one of his supposed work dinners. My pulse thudded in my ears. I Googled the name of the place, a dimly lit bistro across town, the kind that was perfect for 2 people who didn't want to be recognized. I remember sitting on the floor, the receipt in my hand, the washing machine still running. I wanted to scream, to cry, to call him right then and ask, why? But all I did was sit there in silence, because I finally understood the truth. When people lie to you long enough, you start grieving them before they even leave. That night when he came home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, I didn't confront him. I just watched him move through the house like it still belonged to him, watched him kiss my forehead and say, "You okay? You look tired." I almost laughed, because for the first time I wasn't tired. I was awake, painfully, fully awake. And though I hadn't said a word yet, something between us had already shifted forever. After that week, the world began to split in 2, the version he lived in and the one I saw from the outside. Every smile, every casual word, every late-night message carried a double meaning I could no longer ignore. I moved through each day pretending not to notice, but inside, everything in me was sharpening. My intuition had stopped whispering. It was speaking in full sentences now. Daniel was good at pretending. Too good. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still texted midday reminders to stay warm or don't forget to eat. But the rhythm had changed. The words were the same, yet the energy behind them was gone. That's the thing about deception. It leaves fingerprints on tone, timing, silence. He started keeping his phone on silent at home. No more buzzing, no more chimes, just light flickers when he thought I wasn't looking. I'd catch him smiling faintly at the screen, that kind of soft grin that used to be mine. Sometimes I'd walk into the room and he'd set his phone face down, a reflex so smooth it almost looked innocent. I told myself to wait, to be strategic. I didn't want a messy confrontation that left me doubting my own sanity. I'd been there before. Gaslighting doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person who swears they'd never hurt you. So I stayed quiet and started paying attention to the details. His cologne, his habits, his schedule. Every inconsistency became a thread I carefully pulled at, waiting to see what would unravel. One night, while he was in the shower, I heard a soft vibration from the dresser. His phone. I froze, every muscle locked between fear and fury. My hands shook as I picked it up. Not because I doubted what I'd find, but because part of me still hoped to be wrong. There was a message on the screen. A preview. Just a few words, but enough to slice through whatever denial I had left. You left your jacket here. The timestamp was from 20 minutes earlier. I set the phone back exactly where it was and sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding so loudly it felt like sound filling the room. I could hear him humming in the shower, completely unaware that his entire web was beginning to fray. When he came out, towel around his waist, smiling at me like nothing had changed, I felt a cold kind of detachment. Not rage, not heartbreak. Clarity. I didn't confront him then. I didn't even speak. I just watched him move around the room, picking out a t-shirt, checking his phone again, the faint shift in his expression when he read whatever came next. His eyes flicked toward me once, cautious, measuring, then softened. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. My voice was calm, steady, just thinking. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Don't overthink. You always do that." Then he left the room, completely unaware that I had already decided how this story would end. The next day, I started planning. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. More like someone quietly preparing for a storm they know is inevitable. I went through our shared bank account, checking transactions. Small things stood out. Dinner charges at places we'd never been, Uber rides that didn't match his supposed office hours, charges at a boutique I didn't shop at. Each one was a puzzle piece fitting neatly into the picture I'd been too afraid to see. By the end of the week, I'd stopped asking questions out loud. My silence became armor. I let him talk, let him weave the narrative he needed to keep himself safe. I smiled in the right moments, laughed when expected, but every word he spoke added another layer to the distance growing between us. The irony was that he seemed lighter lately, happier. I watched it with a kind of bitter fascination, how guilt made him glow. He thought his secret had freed him, when in truth it had already started caging him. That Friday he told me he'd be working late again. His tone was casual, his eyes unreadable. "Don't wait up," he said, grabbing his keys. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and said, "Drive safe." He left with the confidence of someone who still believed he was untouchable. When the door closed, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space he left behind. Then I walked upstairs, opened my phone, and pulled up the message thread with Melissa. The photo was still there, untouched. It had started everything. I scrolled back through it slowly, memorizing every detail. The light, the pose, the reflection of his watch. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was the point of no return. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't shout, accuse, or beg. I would let him believe everything was normal, until the truth revealed itself so clearly that even he couldn't twist it into something else. He had no idea the woman he was lying to had stopped being naive weeks ago, and the next time he came home late, I wouldn't just be waiting for him, I'd be ready. It happened on a Tuesday, an ordinary, quiet day that had no right to become the one I'd remember for the rest of my life. He'd left early that morning, saying he had a presentation and wouldn't be home until late. I nodded, kissed him goodbye, pretending I didn't already know that half his words were fiction. As the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavy, purposeful. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence before impact. For weeks I'd been collecting details like invisible bruises, receipts, shifts in tone, lies so smooth they sounded like truth. But that morning, I decided I was done with guessing. I needed proof. not because I didn't believe my instincts, but because I wanted something undeniable, something that would leave no room for the usual excuses. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. It's not what it looks like. He'd left his tablet charging on the kitchen counter. A small, careless mistake from someone who'd gotten too comfortable. I stared at it for a long time before unlocking it. He'd synced his messages. The first thing I saw wasn't words. It was a picture. One I recognized instantly. Melissa again. This time, it wasn't just suggestive. It was proof. Her reflection in a hotel mirror, a glass of wine in her hand, the same watch resting on the bedside table next to her. His watch. My stomach clenched so tight I thought I might be sick. The timestamp was from last night. I kept scrolling. Their conversation was all there, months of it. The jokes, the late-night texts, the good mornings and good nights, the quiet, intimate tone reserved for someone who believes they're safe in secrecy. You make work bearable. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. She has no idea. That last message hit like a punch to the ribs. She has no idea. He was right. I hadn't. Not until now. I don't know how long I sat there reading. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, but my mind frighteningly calm. Every word felt like a nail sealing the coffin of the life I thought I had. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation written in casual text bubbles. When he finally came home that night, I was ready. I'd left his tablet exactly where it had been, open on the counter, the screen still glowing faintly. I sat at the table, waiting, heart steady in a way that felt unnatural. "Hey," he said, walking in with that same easy confidence. Tossing his keys onto the counter, he froze when he saw the tablet. I watched the realization flicker in his eyes. Quick, sharp, undeniable. "What's this?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. He tried to play dumb at first. "I don't know what you mean." I tilted my head. "Melissa, the hotel. Last night." His face drained of color. "It's not what it looks like," he started, voice shaking slightly. I almost laughed. "You need new material," I said quietly. He opened his mouth to explain, but no words came out. I'd seen every message, every picture, every line of proof. There was nothing left to spin. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. He finally muttered, "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything." That's the sentence men like him cling to. The desperate illusion that betrayal can be minimized with the right phrasing. It didn't mean anything, but it had meant enough to risk everything for it. "You didn't make a mistake," I said. "You made choices, over and over again." He tried to reach for me, his face contorted in something that looked like guilt but felt more like panic. I stepped back. "Don't," I said softly. "You don't get to touch me and lie in the same breath." He kept talking. Apologies, promises, half-truths spilling into the air like smoke. None of it mattered. The version of me who would have listened, who would have begged for answers, was gone. She'd been replaced by someone quieter, colder, certain. I walked to the door, hand on the frame, and said, "You've been telling her I had no idea. Now you can tell her I do." He didn't follow. Maybe he knew there was nothing left to salvage. Maybe he finally saw that the silence he'd built between us wasn't protection. It was a wall I'd learned to climb over. When I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a truth I'd been avoiding. Sharp, clean, final. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. Behind me, the house was still lit, a picture of normalcy that no longer belonged to either of us. For the first time, I didn't feel like the one being left behind. I was the one walking away. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt like it had changed temperature, colder, sharper, as if even the night was holding its breath. I stood in the driveway, keys in my hand, not sure where I was going, but certain I couldn't stay. Through the window, I could see Daniel still standing by the counter, motionless. His head was bowed, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was trying to hold on to something that had already let go of him. I got in the car, started the engine, and just sat there, the headlights casting long, pale beams across the street. My pulse was loud but steady, the kind of rhythm that comes when shock burns itself out and leaves clarity behind. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to understand the woman looking back at me, the one who'd spent years believing that trust could survive neglect. For a moment, I thought about driving straight to Melissa's apartment. Her address wasn't hard to find. I'd seen it in their messages. I imagined knocking on her door, imagined her expression when she opened it, her face pale, her eyes darting for an escape. But the thought faded as quickly as it came. I didn't need to see her. The betrayal wasn't hers alone. It was his, and it had already unfolded in full. Seeing her wouldn't give me peace. Nothing they said could. Instead, I drove. No destination, just movement. The city blurred past in streaks of yellow light and wet pavement. My hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. The farther I went, the quieter my thoughts became, until it was just me, the hum of the tires, and the low, steady sound of my own breathing. Somewhere between one street light and the next, I realized that I wasn't running away. I was leaving. There's a difference. After an hour, I pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the water. The sky was dark, the kind of heavy gray that blurs the line between night and dawn. I turned off the engine, and for the first time all day, I let the stillness settle around me. My phone was buzzing. Calls, messages, his name lighting up the screen, but I didn't touch it. The world could wait. When the first tear came, it wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost surprised. Then another followed. Then another, until I was crying so quietly it barely made a sound. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was grief, for the version of me that had believed him, for the home I'd built on words that now felt like sand. I cried until there was nothing left to release, just exhaustion and an ache that felt older than the marriage itself. As the horizon began to lighten, I looked at the reflection of the water. Calm, indifferent, endless. It hit me then how betrayal doesn't always explode. Sometimes it just dissolves you slowly until you wake up one morning and realize you've become transparent in your own life. But in that stillness, I also felt something else, a thin thread of strength weaving its way through the cracks. I was still here, still breathing, still capable of rebuilding. When I finally drove home, the streets were empty. Dawn had just broken, that pale, forgiving kind of light that makes everything look softer than it is. Daniel's car was still in the driveway. I parked beside it, took a deep breath, and stepped out. The house was quiet when I entered, but the smell of coffee lingered. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his face hollow, his phone on the counter like a white flag. "I didn't sleep," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. My voice didn't tremble. Neither did I. He started to speak. Maybe to explain, maybe to plead, but I raised my hand. "Don't. You've said enough." The words came out steady, calm, almost kind. That's when I realized the anger was gone. What remained was something heavier, but purer. Acceptance. I walked past him to the living room, where morning light spilled across the floor, and looked around at the home we'd built, the photos, the furniture, the tiny details of a life that no longer belonged to both of us. "I'll pack my things this week," I said. "You don't have to be here when I do." He nodded, silent, eyes red. But there was no relief in his face, only the dull understanding that this time there was no way back. As I turned to leave, he whispered, "I'm sorry." I stopped, just for a heartbeat. "I know you are," I said softly, "but that doesn't make it undone." And then I walked out. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady. Each step felt like the quiet thud of a door closing for good. Outside, the sun had finally risen, painting the world in that tender light that always comes after the storm. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could feel the air move through my lungs freely. I wasn't healed yet, not even close, but I'd finally done the hardest part. I'd stopped pretending I was okay inside a life that kept breaking me. The days after I left felt like walking through fog. Everything was quiet, but nothing was peaceful. The silence of a house without him was different. Not the calm I'd imagined, but an echo. Every sound lingered longer than it should have. Every object carried the faint outline of what used to be. The coffee maker hissed in the mornings like always, but there was no second mug waiting beside it. His side of the bed stayed untouched, too neatly made, as if my mind hadn't caught up to the reality that he wasn't coming back. I stayed with a friend for the first week. She didn't ask for details, and I was grateful for that. Sometimes kindness means leaving space for someone to fall apart quietly. The first few nights, I barely spoke. I'd sit on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, the TV murmuring some show I wasn't watching, my phone face down beside me. He texted a few times, "I miss you. Please talk to me. Can we fix this?" I never answered. Reading his messages felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one step backward would take me somewhere I couldn't survive again. On the third night, I scrolled through our old photos. Vacations, anniversaries, Sunday breakfasts, smiles that looked real. And maybe they were, at least for a time. I wanted to hate every picture, but instead I felt this dull ache of recognition, that love had existed once, before it rotted under lies. I closed the album and whispered, "We had our time," as if saying it aloud could shrink the past into something small enough to move on from. It's strange how routine becomes both your comfort and your undoing. I had to relearn the simplest things. Cooking for one, walking into an empty apartment without expecting footsteps behind me, choosing music that didn't remind me of us. The first time I laughed at something again, really laughed, I startled myself. It wasn't a sound of joy exactly, more like relief, like my body remembering it was still capable of making noise that wasn't crying. By the second week, I stopped checking my phone every time it buzzed. I started taking walks after work, long, aimless ones through the park. The air was cold, but crisp, grounding. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking about the version of me who used to rush home to him, the one who thought devotion could prevent betrayal. I wanted to tell her, "You didn't fail by trusting. Trusting was never the mistake. Staying after the truth revealed itself, that was." One evening, while unpacking my things in the small apartment I'd just rented, I found the framed photo from our 5th anniversary, the one that used to hang above the fireplace. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The way he was looking at me, the way I was smiling back, unaware of the cracks forming under the surface. My throat tightened, but no tears came. I took the frame apart carefully, slid the photo out, and folded it once before tucking it into a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need it anymore. The nights were hardest. That's when the quiet stretched wide and heavy, when memories had too much room to breathe. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching across the bed in half sleep, instinctively searching for warmth that wasn't there. But the emptiness beside me stopped feeling cruel after a while. It started feeling like proof that I had finally made space for myself. One morning, I woke early, sunlight spilling through the blinds, and realized I hadn't thought about him once the night before. Not once. It hit me like something sacred. Healing doesn't arrive with fireworks. It tiptoes in, disguised as an ordinary day. I made coffee, stood by the window, and watched the city start to move. I thought about all the versions of me that had lived through this. The woman who trusted too easily, the one who stayed too long, the one who finally walked away. They all led here, to this quiet apartment, to this morning light, to this fragile but real kind of peace. For the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I just felt human again. And maybe that was enough. The first real sign that I was healing came quietly, not with some grand epiphany, but while grocery shopping on a random Tuesday. I was reaching for a carton of milk when it hit me that I hadn't thought about him all day. Not once. No sudden flash of memory. No phantom ache. Just silence, where there used to be noise. I stood there for a moment, hand frozen mid-air, and felt something unfamiliar. Lightness. Grief has a strange rhythm. It doesn't end cleanly. It fades in layers, from obsession to sadness, then from sadness to distance. I'd stopped counting the days since I left. Each morning I woke up without checking my phone was another thread cut from the web he'd wrapped around me. For the first time, my life wasn't waiting for his schedule, his moods, his attention. The space he left behind was no longer hollow. It was possibility. I started making small choices that felt like rebellion but really weren't. Painting my nails red instead of the muted shades he'd once preferred. Buying a record player. Cooking late at night with music turned up just loud enough for the neighbors to hear. There was joy in these tiny acts of defiance, not because they erased him, but because they reminded me I existed beyond what he'd made me. My friends noticed the change first. "You look different," one said over dinner. "Lighter," I laughed. "That's what happens when you stop carrying someone else's lies." It came out sharper than I meant, but it was true. For months, I'd been walking around with the weight of his guilt on my back. Now it was gone, and my body was remembering how it felt to move without flinching. He texted once more, weeks after the confrontation. Just one message: "I miss talking to you." I stared at it for a long time. There was a time when that sentence would have wrecked me, when I would have replied just to feel needed again, even by the person who broke me. But now, all I felt was calm. Missing me wasn't the same as valuing me, and I'd finally learned the difference. I deleted the message, not out of anger, but out of peace. Some doors don't need to be slammed shut. It's enough just to stop opening them. I began to rebuild the version of myself that existed before him, though I quickly realized she was gone for good, and that was okay. The woman who came after was quieter, but sharper, softer, but stronger. She didn't need validation to feel seen. She didn't crave closure from the person who caused the wound. She'd learned that closure isn't something you receive. It's something you give yourself when you decide to stop waiting for an apology that will never sound right. One evening, months later, I found myself driving past his office building. The lights were still on, late as always. I didn't know if Melissa still worked there, and I didn't care. I just kept driving, the street lights blurring against the windshield. There was no bitterness left, only gratitude. Gratitude that I'd finally learned to listen when my instincts whispered, and to leave when my heart begged me to stay. When I got home, I opened the window and let the night air in. It was cool and still, smelling faintly of rain. I stood there for a long time, looking out at the city, feeling the quiet pulse of my own existence. I'd made it through the worst part. The unraveling, the disbelief, the anger, the grief. What was left now wasn't emptiness. It was room. Room to rebuild, to trust myself, to love again someday, but differently. Before going to bed, I found myself scrolling through my old camera roll. Not for him, but for me. I deleted every photo that no longer felt like mine. Not out of spite, but because they didn't fit the life I was living anymore. When I finished, the screen was nearly empty. Blank. Clean. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like starting over. As I lay in bed that night, the city sounds humming softly outside, I realized that forgiveness, the kind that frees you, doesn't mean you let them back in. It means you stop letting what they did live rent-free in your head. I didn't forgive him for his sake. I forgave him for mine. And somewhere between that thought and the quiet that followed, I finally exhaled, deeply, fully, without fear. Tomorrow would come, as it always does. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread it. I was ready. By the time autumn came, I had settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and entirely mine. Mornings were slow and deliberate, coffee brewing in the silence, sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter, no background noise except the small, ordinary sounds of a life rebuilt from scratch. I didn't wake up with dread anymore. The anxiety that used to live in my chest had loosened its grip, replaced by a steady calm that came from knowing I had survived something meant to break me. People like to talk about moving on as if it's a single, defined act. But it isn't. It's 1,000 small choices you make every day to stop checking their social media, to stop replaying the arguments, to stop wondering if they ever really loved you. Healing doesn't happen in one sweeping motion. It's gradual, like dawn creeping through a dark room, until one morning you realize it's light. I found a new apartment across town, a smaller place with crooked floorboards and ivy creeping along the balcony railing. It was imperfect in all the right ways. I filled it with things that felt like me. Framed art prints, mismatched mugs, soft blankets, and plants I hoped wouldn't die too soon. Every object I chose was a quiet declaration. I'm still here. I'm still building. At first, I avoided the things that reminded me of him. Certain songs, certain streets, certain restaurants. But slowly I started reclaiming them. I played the music louder, walked the same routes, sat in cafes we once loved. Alone this time, coffee in hand, phone untouched. And the strangest thing happened. The memories stopped stinging. They just existed. Proof that once upon a time I loved someone deeply, and it wasn't a waste. It was just a chapter, one I'd finally closed without slamming the cover. Work became easier too. I wasn't distracted anymore, second-guessing every text that came through during office hours. My coworkers noticed. "You seem different," one of them said. "Happier." I smiled. "I think I am." Happiness wasn't the right word yet. It was too bright, too clean. But I was content, peaceful maybe. And that was enough. Sometimes, late at night, I'd still think about the version of me who stayed, the one who kept making excuses, who looked at the red flags and called them misunderstandings. I didn't hate her. She'd done her best with the love she was given, but I also promised myself I'd never silence my own intuition again. Because that voice, the one I kept pushing down, had been right the whole time. It was the sound of self-respect, disguised as fear. One Sunday, I drove out to the lake, the same place I'd gone the night I left him. The air was crisp now, the trees painted in shades of gold and rust. I parked by the water, rolled down the window, and let the wind brush against my face. The world looked different, but maybe it was me who'd changed. I didn't need closure anymore. I didn't need to rewrite what had happened to make it hurt less. The pain had already done its job. It had turned into strength. I watched the reflection of the sky ripple across the lake and thought about everything I'd learned. That love built on lies is a house with invisible cracks. And no matter how beautiful it looks, it will fall. That forgiveness doesn't mean inviting someone back in. Sometimes it's just releasing the weight they left behind. And that solitude isn't loneliness. It's a space where you finally hear yourself clearly. As the light began to fade, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." Not to him, but to the version of myself who refused to stay small, who walked away even when her heart was begging her to turn back. Driving home, the city lights shimmered ahead of me like a horizon I hadn't realized I'd been chasing. The radio played softly, and for once, the songs didn't ache. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel. Steady, sure. I wasn't the same woman who'd received that photo months ago. She'd been uncertain, afraid to trust her own eyes. I was someone else now, grounded, patient, unflinchingly honest. My life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time, that was enough. The future no longer scared me. It felt open, wide and full of light, waiting to be lived on my terms. It's strange, looking back now, how something as small as a single photo could unravel an entire life. One image, one careless moment, and everything I thought I knew about my marriage collapsed in silence. But that's how betrayal works, isn't it? It doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it slips quietly into your messages on a random Tuesday and waits for you to open your eyes. For a long time, I blamed myself for not seeing it sooner, for ignoring the signs, for believing that love could outlast neglect. But healing taught me something I didn't expect. That trust, even when misplaced, is not weakness. It's proof that you had the courage to believe in someone fully. The shame doesn't belong to the person who trusted. It belongs to the one who made that trust feel foolish. I used to think strength meant keeping everything together, staying calm, forgiving quickly. Now I know it's the opposite. Strength is letting things fall apart when they need to. It's looking at the truth, however ugly, however humiliating, and saying, I will survive this too. I don't hate Daniel anymore. That surprised me the most. Hate takes energy, and I was tired of giving him any more of mine. What he did was cruel, but it doesn't define me. The betrayal was his act, the healing was mine, and in that balance, I came out stronger. Sometimes I still think about Melissa, not with bitterness, but with a detached kind of curiosity. I wonder if she ever realized the mess she'd stepped into, or if she convinced herself it was love, the same way I once did. Either way, she's just another piece of a story I've already finished reading. The truth is, I don't need revenge or justice. I don't need to prove that I was the better person. The greatest revenge is peace. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself. The kind that sits quietly in your chest and says, "You're free now." I used to miss the sound of his keys in the door, the comfort of knowing someone was coming home. Now I find peace in the stillness of my own space. I light candles at night. I play music softly in the background. I laugh again, that real, unguarded kind of laughter that feels like oxygen after holding your breath for too long. The loneliness I once feared has turned into solitude, and solitude, I've learned, can be sacred. When people ask if I'd ever trust again, I tell them yes, but differently, not with blind faith or hope disguised as patience. I'll trust when someone earns it, when their actions don't need translation, when love feels steady instead of performative. Betrayal doesn't destroy your capacity to love. It refines it. You stop chasing intensity and start craving honesty. Sometimes late at night, I catch myself smiling for no reason. Not because everything is perfect, but because I survived the worst of it, and I didn't lose myself in the process. I'm still standing, still soft, still open. If someone had told me back then that I'd one day be grateful for that accidental photo, I would have laughed. But in a way, I am. It was the universe's blunt, painful way of showing me what I refused to see. It forced an ending I didn't know I needed. And endings, no matter how cruel, have a way of becoming beginnings if you let them. So if you've ever found yourself staring at proof you didn't want, wondering how to breathe through the betrayal, you will. The heartbreak won't destroy you, it'll sculpt you. And one day you'll wake up to a version of yourself that's quieter, wiser, and finally free of the weight you never should have carried. Because sometimes the story doesn't end with getting them back. It ends with getting yourself back. Has this ever happened to you? Share your story in the comments.